How exactly do forensic scientists identify a microscopic trace of a deadly poison at a crime scene? Or, think about this, what is actually happening inside your body when it forms a really painful kidney stone? It sounds totally unrelated, right? But it turns out, both of these mysteries are solved using the exact same principles of chemical forensics.
By the end of this explainer, you're going to understand exactly how to calculate the true chemical formula of an unknown substance completely from scratch. And you'll be able to predict exactly what will happen when different chemicals are mixed together in a solution. We're literally going to turn you into a chemical detective today.
So here's our map for today. First, empirical versus molecular formulas. Second, calculating empirical formulas. Third, precipitation reactions. Fourth, predicting the precipitate. And finally, a quick summary and a challenge. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. Empirical versus molecular formulas. To kick off our detective work, we first really need to understand the language of chemical formulas. There are two main types you need to know, and confusing them is a very common student mistake.
Think of this whole thing like baking. The empirical formula is basically the foundational recipe. It's the absolute simplest bare bones ratio of ingredients. For example, 1 part sugar to 1 part flour. It tells you the proportions, right? But it doesn't tell you how big the cake actually is. The molecular formula, on the other hand, is the actual size of the batch you're making. It tells you the exact real-world number of atoms in a specific molecule.
Let's make this a bit easier with an example. Take dioxin, which is a really powerful and dangerous poison. Its actual, real-world molecular formula is C12H4Cl4O2. That is what's physically there. But notice those subscript numbers, 12, 4, 4, and 2. Well, they can all be cleanly divided by 2. And if we do that, we get C6H2Cl2O. That is the empirical formula. It's the exact same ratio of ingredients, just reduced down to its simplest whole number terms.
Section 2. Calculating empirical formulas. Now that we understand the basic idea of these formulas, let's move to the math. How do we actually determine that foundational recipe from raw data in a lab? Here is the step-by-step logic. Remember, chemical formulas represent the number of atoms, not how heavy they are. So if a lab gives you the mass of your elements in grams, you absolutely cannot just use those numbers directly. Step 1. You must convert that mass into moles using the molar mass from the periodic table. Step 2. You take those mole values and divide all of them by the smallest value in the group to find the ratio. And step 3, if your ratio has decimals, you just multiply them by an integer until they're all whole numbers.
Let's look at a real example using hematite, which is this really cool black mineral used in jewelry. A sample has 34.97 grams of iron and 15.03 grams of oxygen. Step 1, we convert to moles. For iron, we divide by its molar mass, getting about 0.6262 moles. For oxygen, we get about 0.9394 moles. Step 2, we divide both by the smaller number, which is that 0.6262. This gives us a ratio of 1 iron to 1.5 oxygen. Now, wait, this is super important. Do not round off your values in the middle of the calculation. 1.5 is not close enough to 1 or 2 to just round it. So for step 3, we multiply both by 2 to get whole numbers. 1 times 2 is 2. 1.5 times 2 is 3, meaning our empirical formula is Fe2O3.
Okay, now it's time for a quick retention check. Sometimes you aren't given grams at all. You're given percentages. Imagine a gas formed by fermenting grain into ethanol. It's 40% carbon, 6.71% hydrogen, and 53.28% oxygen. How do you find the empirical formula when you only have percentages? Take just a few seconds to think about how you'd start that. The trick here is actually beautifully simple. Just assume you have exactly a 100-gram sample. If you have 100 grams total, then 40% carbon is simply 40 grams of carbon. You literally just drop the percent sign and write grams. From there, you follow the exact same steps we just learned. Convert to moles, divide by the smallest, and you'll find the ratio is 1 carbon, 2 hydrogen, and 1 oxygen, giving us an empirical formula of CH2O. Section 3. What are precipitation reactions? Okay, let's dive into our next core concept. We've decoded the recipes, but what actually happens when we mix these chemicals together?
This brings us to precipitation reactions. A precipitation reaction is when dissolved substances react to form a solid product. I want you to visualize this kind of like a grand ballroom dance where everyone is swapping dance partners. You have 2 dissolved ionic compounds, meaning they're floating around as separated positive and negative ions in water. When we mix them, they swap partners. But sometimes, a newly formed pair of ions realizes they just don't want to stay dissolved in the water anymore. They sit out the dance, bind tightly together, and fall to the bottom of the beaker as a solid. That solid is what we call the precipitate.
Now you might be asking, why does this happen? Why do some stay dissolved and others turn into a solid? Well, the reason is solubility. Every single substance has a limit to how much of it can dissolve in water. When a new chemical partner pairing has a very low solubility, it immediately exceeds that limit and crashes out as a solid. And this isn't just lab science. This exact process is how massive coral reefs form in the ocean, and unfortunately, it's exactly how those painful kidney stones precipitate out of solutions right inside your body.
Section 4. Predicting the precipitate. So the totally crucial point for a chemical detective is figuring out exactly which new partner pairing will form that solid. How do we predict it?
We use solubility rules to act as our predictive rulebook. These rules tell you which ions generally dissolve and, more importantly, the exceptions. For instance, consider nitrates. They are highly soluble, absolutely no exceptions. If a molecule has nitrate in it, it's staying dissolved in the water. But then consider the halides like chloride and iodide. They are usually soluble, except when they pair up with silver, lead, or mercury. If those particular ions meet on the dance floor, they immediately form a solid.
Let's see this in action with a specific reaction. Say we mix potassium iodide with lead nitrate. Both start as clear, dissolved aqueous liquids. Then they swap partners. The potassium pairs with the nitrate, and according to our rules, nitrates are always soluble, so they happily stay dissolved. But the lead pairs with the iodide. Our rulebook tells us lead iodide is an exception. It is completely insoluble. Boom! A bright yellow solid instantly appears in the water. In fact, this specific precipitate was historically used by artists as a vibrant yellow paint pigment.
Let's do one more rapid-fire retention check just to make sure you have this down. If you mix barium nitrate and potassium sulfate together, they're going to swap partners. Based on the rules we just discussed, which new combination is going to form the solid precipitate?
The answer is barium sulfate, BaSO4. When they swap, potassium nitrate stays soluble, but if you look at the sulfate rules, barium is listed as an exception, therefore barium sulfate is insoluble and it becomes our solid precipitate.
Section 5. Summary and Final Challenge. Before we finish up, let's quickly summarize the key points that turned you into a chemical detective today.
First, we learned that an empirical formula is the simplest ratio of a recipe, while the molecular formula is the actual atomic count. Second, to calculate these formulas, you must convert your masses or percentages into moles first, then divide by the smallest number. Third, precipitation reactions happen when dissolved ions swap partners and form an insoluble solid. And finally, you can always predict what that solid will be by consulting your solubility rules.
I want to leave you with one final practical thought. We all know and love caffeine, right? Well, the empirical formula, the basic ratio for caffeine is C4H5N2O. If you add up those molar masses, that basic unit weighs about 97 grams per mole. But lab tests show the actual molar mass of caffeine is about 194 grams per mole. How many times does 97 go into 194? I'll let you do the math on that to find the true molecular formula of caffeine. It's a great test of your brand new skills and honestly, the perfect reason to jump into our next explainer to see if your deduction is correct. Keep analyzing, and I'll see you in the next one.